In this lesson, you will learn how to find the least common multiple. So first, the definition of multiple is the product of a number and any whole number. So if I take the number 2 and list the first 5 multiples, it's 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, 2 times 4, and 2 times 5. And the list keeps going. The multiples of 3 would be 3 times 1, 3 times 2, 3 times 3, and the list just continues. I'm just writing the first 5 multiples. And if you had something like 3x, then the multiples would be 3x times 1, 3x times 2 is 6x, 3x times 3 is 9x. So all I'm doing is just multiplying the 3 by 1, 2, 3, and then 4, and just adding the x on at the end. And again, multiples continue. The least common multiple is the smallest multiple that 2 or more numbers have in common. So if I list the multiples of 2 and 3 again, since both of these lists continue, they would have many multiples in common. But the least common multiple is the smallest number that they have in common, which is 6. So we would say that the least common multiple between 2 and 3 is 6. So to find the least common multiple between numbers, I'm going to find it the same way as I just showed you with 2 and 3. So I'm going to take the numbers 8 and 12, and I always start by listing the first 5. And if I don't have a match, then I'll just continue the lists. So I start with 8 times 1, 8 times 2, 8 times 3, 8 times 4, and 8 times 5. And now when I list the first 5 multiples of 12, let's see if we have a match or if we have to extend the list. So I have 12 times 1, 12 times 2, 12 times 3, 12 times 4, and 12 times 5. So since I don't have a match yet, so if I look at my two lists, the smallest number that they have in common is 24. So the least common multiple is 24. So if you have 3 numbers, 4, 9, and 18, again, you find it the same way, but you just have to make 3 lists instead of 2. So I'll start with 4 and list the first 5 multiples. And the larger the number, you might have to do multiplication on the side. You have 18 times 1, 18 times 2 is 36, 18 times 3 is 54, 18 times 4 is 72, and 18 times 5 is 90. So if you look at these 3 lists, you don't have any numbers in common. So what I'm going to do is extend the list that ends with the lowest number, which is 20. Since this one ends in 45 and this one is 90, we may get a match if we just extend the 4s list. So I'm going to extend this 5 more. So again, just counting by 4s, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, then 24, 28, 32, 36, and 40. So now if I look at my 3 lists, I have the number 36 in common on all 3 lists. So my least common multiple is 36. Now for number 3, we have 2 monomials, 5x squared and 12x. I'm just going to disregard the x squared and the x just to find the least common multiple of the numbers, and then I'll show you what to do with them at the end. So this part doesn't change. If I just list the first 5 multiples of 5, and then of 12, I don't have any numbers in common yet, so I take the list that ends with the lower number and continue out 5 more. And 5 more, I still don't have a match, but I can extend this out 2 more, and I end with 60, and 60 is the smallest number that 5 and 12 have in common. So far, my least common multiple is equal to 60. Then what you do is you look back at your x's, and you have an x squared and an x to the first. Unlike the greatest common factor, where you want the lower of the two powers, for least common multiple, you want the higher of the two powers. So 2 is higher than 1, so next to 60, your least common multiple is 60x squared. So for number 4, we have 2 more monomials, but I just disregard the variables and just look at 15 and 21 and just start by finding the least common multiple between these two numbers. So I count by 15s. I'll count the first 5 values of 15, and then of 21, and I don't have a match, so I'm going to extend this list, and I actually don't have to continue 5 more because 105 is the smallest number that they have in common. So far, my least common multiple is 105. Then I look back at my x's, and I have an x cubed and an x to the first. So for least common multiples, we want the higher of the two powers, which is x cubed. And then I go back and look at my y's. I have y squared and y to the fifth. The higher of the two powers is 5, so my least common multiple is 105 x cubed y to the fifth. And for number 5, we have 3 monomials, so now I have to make 3 lists, one for 12, 15, and 20. And you can stop your list if you see a match, and I see that my first match was at the number 60. So don't feel you have to continue on if you already see the smallest number that the 3 lists have in common. So we start with our least common multiple is 60, and then I look back at my a's. I have an a cubed, a to the first, and my last term does not have an a. So unlike the greatest common factor, where you have to have a letter in every single term, you don't have to have a letter in every single term for the least common multiple. So I just look at a to the first and a cubed. I take the higher of the two powers, which is a cubed, and then I look at my b terms. I have a b squared, b to the first, and b to the first. So all 3 have a b, but I still want the higher of the powers, which is b squared. And last, I look at my c's, and my second term has c to the first, my third term has c squared, the higher of the powers is 2, so my least common multiple is 60a cubed So next I look at my c's, and I have c to the first and c squared in only my second and third terms. So again, not every term has to have a letter, but you still take the higher of the letters, which is c squared. So my least common multiple is 60a cubed b squared c squared. And one thing that we'll want to look at is how to find a least common denominator. A least common denominator is the smallest number that the denominators have in common, which is basically what we've just been doing above, but calling it a least common multiple. So when you're asked to find a least common denominator, it's the same process as finding a least common multiple. So we're not going to do anything with the least common denominator yet, other than learn how to find it. So if I start by listing the multiples of 8, and I don't have to continue my list, I see a match of 40, I will say that my least common denominator, which I'll abbreviate as LCD, is equal to 40. And then later on we'll look at what to do with the least common denominator. Right now we're just finding it. And number 7, we have 5 over 12 and 9 out of 16. So I take 12 and 16 and list their multiples. And for 16, when I stop at 48, I see a match. So my least common denominator is equal to 48.